How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Vav, Daf 56 of Masechta Menachos, friends. Daf 56. Okay, 56. We wrap up the discussion that began yesterday where we kind of got into, why did we even get into that? I can't remember. Because talking about baking the minchah and chometz and stuff. But anyways, along the way we got into that whole question about Klal ufradu klal, right? Amruchakin zemizeh, and where we ended yesterday. I feel like, excuse me, I felt like I had to sneeze, and sure enough, I did. Where we ended yesterday, we were kind of in the middle of an exploration about the sa'ir nasi, essentially the Korbin chatas of the king, and it says v'shachat oso, and the question is what is that coming to? What is it? V'shachat oso, right? Yeah. What is that coming to exclude? Because we had thought maybe it was part of some klal ufradu klal scheme. We said it wasn't. So then what's it doing there? So we're going to kind of wrap up that discussion. That's kind of the first chunk of today's daf, wrapping that up. And then we discuss baking a chometz minchah. We had said in the Mishnah that you're going to be chayiv for each of the steps, for the kneading, for the shaping, for the baking. So we're going to get into that sugya as well. Friends, this is what we have to look forward to on Daf Nun Vav of Masechta Menachos. Let's jump in. Friends, we begin on Daf Nun Hey Omid Beis on the first of the wide lines, which is also 5 lines before the end of the Daf. V'hashta denafka le mi v'shachat es achatos. So now that we've learned that all chataos need to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah, that is learned from the pasuk of v'shachat es achatos bimkom ba'ola, by a regular Korbin chatas. So oso lemutemai. So we had this pasuk by sa'ir nasi that had said v'shachat oso bimkom asher yishchat es ha'ola lifnei Hashem chatasu. So we had that pasuk by Sa'ir Nasi, which initially wanted to say that maybe only the Sa'ir Nasi needs to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah, to which we said no, all chatos have to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. So then what is Oso coming to limit it? Well, what is it limiting? It's not limiting to say that it's only the Sa'ir Nasi, because it's all chatos are slaughtered in the north of the azarah. So what's the limitation of Oso by Sa'ir Nasi? Lemute Oso b'tzofim vein Sa'ir nachshin b'tzofim azoi. Well, it's to say that yes, while the Sa'ir Nasi is slaughtered in the north of the azarah, the Sa'ir Nachshin is not. What's the Sa'ir Nachshin? Sa'ir Nachshin is a reference to the Korbin chatas by the Nisim, by the Chanukas HaMizbeach, and the second year of the sojourn of the Yidden in the wilderness was the Chanukas HaMishkan, and as well as and part of that Chanukas HaMizbeach. And of course, every single day for the first 12 days coming up, right? The Rosh Chodesh Nisan is coming up next week, and to this very day we don't say Tachanun the first 12 days of. I think that's why, right? The whole Chodesh Nisan we don't say Tachanun. I think it's because the first 12 days. I think it's related to that. No, why not? The first 12 days of Nisan was kind of all the korbanos of the Nisim, the Chanukas HaMizbeach, and then already you get to the 14th, it's already Erev Pesach, and then you have Pesach and Kilu. I think then just because since most of the month you don't say Tachanun, I guess maybe all the months you don't say Tachanun, but I think, I think the fact that the Nisim were the first 12 days contributes to why we don't say Tachanun all of Nisan. For example, Chodesh Tishrei, we don't say Tachanun starting from Sukkos, right? But otherwise we say Tachanun. Anyways, I don't know. Whatever. That's Tachanun. I have to look that up. But why am I saying this? I'm saying that I'm saying that Rosh Chodesh Nisan is coming up, and that the Korbanos of the Nisim was beginning on Rosh Chodesh Nisan for the first 12 days of Nisan. Every day, a different Nasi from a different tribe would bring Korbanos, and part of those Korbanos were a Korbin chatas. Now, what was unique about that Korbin chatas is that it wasn't actually brought for any avera. Of course, as we know, I think we know, do we not know, that any avera that you chayev kares for when you do it on purpose, by accident you bring a Korbin chatas, right? As dono karis v'ashigagasol chatas, which I imagine we're going to learn more about Masechta Kresus. Ahead of us, we have to finish Masechta Menachos, then Masechta Chulin, then Masechta Bechoris, Arochin, Tmura, Kresus. Masechta Kresus is all about Koris. Things that you chayiv Koris for, and different korbanos that you bring because of them. Just yesterday on Shabbos, I finished learning Mishnayos, Masechta Kresus. I am now beginning Masechta Me'ilo in Mishnayos. Akoponim. Where were we? So the Sayur Nachshin, it is a Korbin chatas. It's technically right. Usir izim echod the chatas, and that chatas was not brought for any kind of an aver. It was an exceptional thing. It was an exceptional kind of Korbin that was brought as part of the Chanukas HaMizbeach. And what Oso is excluding when it comes to the Sayur Nasi, the Korbin chatas of a king, is that it is slaughtered in the north, but the Sayur Nachshin could be slaughtered anywhere in the azarah. Okay. So also Batzofin vein Sayur Nachshin Batzofin, because after all, Salkadaite Chamina, I may have thought to say, Hol ve'israbi le'inyon smicha l'srabi nami le'inyon tzofin. Kamash malon. Okay. I may have had a habit to say that since by the Sayur Nachshin, by the Chanukas HaMizbeach, the Sayur Nachshin, you do smicha for the Sayur Nachshin. So I may have thought that just like you do smicha by the Sayur Nachshin, you also have to slaughter in the north, right? By a regular Korbin chatas, there's smicha, there is shchita batzofin. So I may have thought that just like by the Sayur Nachshin, there is smicha, so also by the Sayur Nachshin, there would be shchita batzofin. So therefore, Kamash Malon, also to say that no, only the Sayur Nasi is in the north of the Shechita is in the north of the azarah, to the exclusion of the Sayur Nachshin. The Sayur Nachshin does not need to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. Even though it is included for Smicha, it's excluded for Shechita Batzofin. And that's learned out from the Oso by the Sayur Nasi. Givaldig. Bein Sayur Nachshin Batzofin. Fine, Sakadat Chamina Hol B'Srabi Linin Smicha, the Srabi Nama Linin Sofin, Kamash Malon Nish. Freg de Gemara V'Smicha Gufa Minolin. Okay, and how do we know, Bichlal, that the Sayur Nachshin, you have to do smicha by the Sayur, that there was smicha by the Sayur Nachshin? That Nachshin leaned on his Sayur? Or at least, yeah, I assume it was Nachshin who leaned on his Sayur. Because that's the whole point, right? Meaning, since there is smicha by the Sayur Nachshin, we thought to say that maybe there should also be shchita batzafin, comes also to exclude it. So that all banks on the fact, that all hinges on the fact that there is smicha by the Sayur Nachshin. How do we know, Bichlal, that there's smicha by the Sayur Nachshin? So, the Tanya is we learn in a braisa of V'somach Yodoi al Rosh HaSayur. It also says by the Sayur Nasi, the Korbin chatas of a king. It says V'somach Yodo al Rosh HaSayur. It could have just said V'somach Yodo al Rosho, on its head, but it says al Rosh HaSayur. It specifies Sayur to say, to include that not just this Sayur, but also the Sayur of Nachshin. Also, there is smicha. L'rabos Sayur Nachshin, the smicha de Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it is coming to include the goat of Nachshin, the Korbin chatas of Nachshin, that it is also, there is smicha there. Reb Shimon Omer, however, says Reb Shimon, the Rabbos Seirei Avodas Kechovim l'smicha. Whereas Reb Shimon disagrees and he says, no, the seir, the seir that is coming to be included is not the Sayur Nachshin, but rather seir Avodah Zarah. That if the Yidden, God forbid, accidentally do Avodah Zarah based on Horaz Bezdin, so there would be smicha there as well. Maskiv lo Ravina, but now Ravina asks, of course, the question, which is begging to be questioned. Tenach lo Rabbi Yehuda lo Reb Shimon ma'ikil amimer. Okay, so that's all fine and good according to Rabbi Yehuda. Right? Our whole argument to say that Oso excludes Sayur Nachshin from Shchita Batzofin is based on the fact that it's included for smicha, and therefore we have to exclude it for shchita batzofin. How do we know that it's included by for smicha? It's takamachlek. So Rabbi Yehuda says it's included for smicha. According to Rabbi Shimon, it's not included for smicha. There's no smicha by Sayur Nachshin. So according to Rabbi Shimon, then why would you need oso? What's being excluded, right? The whole point of oso to exclude from shchita batzofin assumes that it's included by smicha. That's only according to Rabbi Yehuda. What about according to Rabbi Shimon? Over the Marzutra Breder of Mari, the Ravina, but the Marzutra Breder of Mari, asks the Kasha Ravina, he says, but the Rabbi Yehuda Nami. Wait a second, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's still not so pashut. My de Israbi, my de lo Israbi. Still, one second. Marzutra Breder the Rav Mari. So yes, the Kasha Ravina says, one second. When it comes to the Sa'ir Nachshin, by default, we're starting with an assumption that there's no smicha and there's no shchita batzafin. Comes the pasuk by Sa'ir Nasi that says, V'samach yada rosh ha'sa'ir. Okay, Sa'ir is coming to include, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda, is coming to include that by Sa'ir Nasi, no, that by Sa'ir Nachshin, there is smicha. Otherwise, I would assume that there isn't. No smicha, no shchita batzafin. Comes the word Sa'ir by the Sa'ir Nasi, and the word Sa'ir is extra to include even the Sa'ir Nachshin needs smicha. Okay, mazel tov. So all I know now is that the Sa'ir Nachshin needs smicha. Great, according to Rabbi Yehuda. I still have no indication though. Nobody said anything about shchita batzafin. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no shchita batzafin, and therefore, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, I don't need also to exclude Sa'ir Nachshin from shchita batzafin. By default, shchita batzafin and smicha were both excluded by Sa'ir Nachshin. We come Sa'ir by Sa'ir Nasi. The extra word Sa'ir comes to include smicha by Sa'ir Nachshin. Okay, great. So we have smicha by Sa'ir Nachshin. I have no indication that there should be shchita batzafon. Certainly, I don't need a pasuk of also to exclude Sa'ir Nachshin from shchita batzafon. I have no having to even include it in the first place. Certainly, I don't need to exclude something that I never even thought to include. So again, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that there is smicha by Sa'ir Nachshin, my de Israbi, that which is included is included. Okay, so mazel tov, there's smicha. My de lo Israbi, what was never included is not included. So shchita batzafon was never included. Therefore, there's no requirement of shchita batzafon. And I certainly don't need to exclude it if it was never included in the first place. If you're going to say, ilo ma'ate kra, and if you're going to say, no, I do need oso. If you're going to say, I do need oso to exclude shchita batzafin by Sa'ir Nachshin. Why? Well, because then I would have said a binyanav. Hamematzinu. I would have said, you know what? Just like by chataos, shchita is batzafon. Just like by all other chataos, shchita is batzafon. So also by the Sa'ir Nachshin, which is technically a Korbin chatas, even though it's not coming for a sin, it also needs to be slaughtered in the north. So if I didn't have oso by Sa'ir Nasi to exclude Sa'ir Nachshin from shchita batzafon, I would have used the mematzinu. I would have said otherwise, that just like by all chatos the shchita is batzafon, so also by the Sa'ir Nachshin. But if that's the case, then say the same thing by smicha. If we're going to say that by default, we would say that just like all chatos need to be slaughtered in the north, so too the Sa'ir Nachshin. So then say the same thing by smicha, just like all chatos require smicha. So also the Sa'ir Nachshin requires smicha. I don't need the word Sa'ir to include smicha by Sa'ir Nachshin, according to Rabbi Yehuda. If you're going to say ilo ma'ate kra, if we didn't have oso to exclude Sa'ir Nachshin from shchita batzafin, havamina, I would have said teisi bebinyanav. I would have just said that just like by all chatos, there's shchita batzafon also by the Sa'ir Nachshin. Well, smicha gufa lishtik kra mine v'teise bebinyanav. Well, say the zel bezach, say the same thing by smicha. We don't need the word Sa'ir to include Sa'ir Nachshin for smicha, since I'll just say that all chatos require smicha, so too the Sa'ir Nachshin. But we apparently do need the pasuk to include smicha by the Sa'ir Nachshin, which means that we clearly are not relying upon the binyanav, upon the mem matzinu. So ella sha'a midoris lo yalfinun. Rather, when it comes to smicha, we are not learning out sha'a midoris. Sha'a being the Sa'ir Nachshin, a one-off, a one-time event, and doris being Korbin chatas in general that are for all generations. Hopefully, in our generation as well. Amen. So therefore, we don't learn out one-time korbanos from all generation korbanos, and therefore all generation korbanos, right? All chatos require smicha. I wouldn't necessarily assume that the sarah nachshon requires smicha. Therefore, I need the pasuk to include the sarah nachshon for smicha. And the same thing, achanami shamidoros le'afinon. And guess what? The same thing by shchita batzofin. We would not assume shchita batzofin for sarah nachshon, even though by all chatos there's shchita batzofin. We wouldn't naturally extend that to sarah nachshon since it's a one-time thing. So therefore, we have no assumption, we have no reason to assume bichlal that by sarah nachshon there would be shchita batzofin. And therefore, there is certainly no reason to exclude sarah nachshon from shchita batzofin, because I never would have thought in the first place to include it for shchita batzofin. So ella also ton tzofin vein hashochet omid batzofin. Rather, says the Gemara, okay, if that's the case, then so what is also doing there? We want to say it's excluding sarah nachshon from shchita batzofin, but we said no, unnecessary. So what is also excluding? So ella also ton tzofin, that the sarah nachshon, no, the sarah nasi, the king's Korbin chatas needs to be tzofin, needs to be in the north of the azarah. That when the pasuk says, well, okay, so the shchita of the sarah nasi, well, when slaughtering the sarah nasi, the sa'ir, the goat, needs to be in the north of the azarah. But the shaychit, the slaughterer, doesn't need to be standing in the north of the azarah. The animal that's being slaughtered must be in the north of the azarah. The slaughterer doing the slaughtering doesn't need to be in the north of the azarah. If he could be standing in the south of the azarah. He has a long knife or whatever it might be, long enough to be able to slice off the head slice the throat of the animal. Anyways, so we're saying the animal needs to be in the north of the azarah. The shaychit does not necessarily need to be in the north of the azarah. Okay, and that would be by the sarah nasi, and I believe that we would extend that to other Korbin chatases as well. But anyways, that's what we're learning. That what oso is coming to exclude that the animal needs to be in the north of the azarah. The slaughterer does not need to be in the north of the azarah. It could be in the south of the azarah and just have a knife that is long enough to do the job. Midrab achya nafka, but for Egdi Gemara, I don't need the pasuk by sarah nasi to teach me that. We already know that from Reb Achya. The sanya that we learned about Reb Achya almost says Reb Achya v'shachat oisa yerich amizbeach tzafona. That the pasuk says by Korbin chata. Is it by? Maybe I think it's talking about Korbin ola actually. V'shachat also, but of course we learn out v'shachat is a chatas b'mkom sheish chatas ola. V'shachat also ayerich hamizbeach tzfona. That it is slaughtered ayerich hamizbeach tzfona in the north of the mizbeach. Mata melomar lefisha matzinu b'mekabel she'omid b'tzofin u'mekabel b'tzofin. Well, since when it comes to kabbalah sadam, the kabbalah sadam, the animal needs to be in the north, and the person receiving the dam also needs to be in the north. And if the one who is receiving the blood doing Kabbalah Sadam was standing in the south, but was receiving the blood squirting out of the neck of the animal, and the animal was in the north, but he was standing in the south, pasul. So Yochalav Zekin, is it possible that the same would apply to Shchita? So Talmud Omer also, Shachat also betzofin v'la shaychit betzofin v'la shaychit tzarich le'oz omid betzofin. But the slaughterer does not need to be standing in the north. The animal needs to be in the north. The slaughterer does not need to be in the north. No. So we already know from Reb Achya that the slaughterer does not need to be standing in the north. The animal needs to be in the north. The slaughterer does not need to be in the north. So again, what is oso coming to exclude? Ella oso batzofin, ve'ein ben of batzofin. Okay, the goat of the king, needs to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah, but a bird does not need to be malikad in the north of the azarah. The malika could be anywhere in the azarah. Sagadati chamino. I may have thought to say, Lacey bekal v'chomer mi benson. Because otherwise, I may have thought to say, from a kal v'chomer, from a sheep. Uma benson shelo kavalo kohen kavalo tzofin. Because after all, when it comes to a sheep, where it's more lenient in that anybody could slaughter the sheep, even Yisrael, right? Mikabola va'elach mitzvahs geuna. You only need a kohen from Kabbalah Saddam and onwards. But the shechita could be done by anybody. It could be shechitas ksher bizarre. And yet, we're stringent when it comes to the location of the shechita. It has to be in the north. So ben of shekavaloi kohen. So a bird where we're more stringent to begin with, that we need a kohen to do the malika. Nobody else can do it. So enudin shenik balo tzofin. So certainly we should be more stringent also in terms of the location where the bird is malika. It must be in the north. And therefore comes oso to say no, the sa'ir nasi needs to be in the north, but the birds do not need to be malikad in the north. Male benson, but one second, I wouldn't have actually thought to say that because benson shekain kavalo kli. One second. When it comes to sheep, they're more stringent to begin with because you have to slaughter them with a knife, whereas a bird you just slaughter with your fingernail. So maybe I can understand why a sheep, not only is it stringent in that you have to slaughter with a knife, but also it's stringent in that it has to be in the north. But I wouldn't necessarily assume that a bird, which doesn't need to be slaughtered with a knife, maybe it also doesn't need to be in the north. Also about sofin vein pesach, but sofin. Okay, so one second, fine. So you know what also is coming to exclude has nothing to do with a bird. Rather, it's to say that the sa'ir nasi needs to be slaughtered in the north, but a Korbin pesach does not need to be slaughtered in the north. It can be slaughtered anywhere in the azarah. You could skip the next few words to the end and go to skip to the next line. The sani that we learned in a brayso of Eliezer ben Yaakov, says Eliezer ben Yaakov, Yachol Yehei HaPesach Ton Sofin. Is it possible that the Korbin Pesach would have to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah? V'dinu Uma Ola Shelo Kavalazman B'Shchitasa Kavala Sofin. Because after all, I would make the argument that when it comes to a Korbin Ola, which there's no specific window of time to offer Korbin Ola. You can offer a Korbin Ola whenever you want. If a person is bringing a Korbin Ola, there isn't like a very specific window to offer it, and yet it needs to be slaughtered in the Kavala Tzafon. It needs to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. Pesach shekavalo zman l'shchitaso. Now, when it comes to Korbin Pesach, where there's a very limited time to slaughter it, it's stringent in the fact it's already kind of stringent in the fact that there's a very limited window to slaughter it. Enodin shekavalo tzofin. Certainly, it should have to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. So I may have thought to say that the Korbin Pesach, just like a Korbin Ola, right? Korbin Pesach should have to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. So we need to say that the Korbin Pesach doesn't need to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. It can be slaughtered anywhere in the azarah. But one second. But that whole logic was based on the Korbin Ola. But Mala Ola Shekain Kalil. One second. Korbin Ola is stringent in that it's entirely burnt. So I can understand why it's additionally stringent and needs to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. However, a Korbin Pesach is not entirely burnt. Maybe it doesn't. I wouldn't necessarily assume that it has to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. Mechatas. Okay, so it's enough mechatas, which is not entirely burnt. And yet it needs to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. Malachatas became mechaperes al chai bekreis. Yeah, but chatas is stringent in that it can even be mechaper for chiyuvei karis. Me'oshim, so it's enough from oshim, which is not mechaper for chiyuvei karis. Mala oshim shekain koche kochim. Yeah, but oshim is stringent in that it's koche kochim. Mikulanam shekain koche kochim. Okay, once we've mentioned the koche kochim thing, you're right, Taka. In Ola and chatas and in Oshim, they're all koche kochim. And therefore, you know what? We can't learn, even though they have to be in the north of the azarah, Pesach is kochim kalim. I wouldn't necessarily assume that it needs to be in the north of the azarah. It could be anywhere in the azarah. Okay, if that's the case, back to our question, what is oso come to exclude? It's not, right? So we're saying oso, so your nasi is sorted in the north of the azarah. We want to say it needs to be sorted in the north of the azarah, but not a Korbin Pesach. I wouldn't have thought the Korbin Pesach anyways needs to be slaughtered in the north of the azarah. So elul olam kidamina meikar. You know what? Going back to one of our earlier answers, also batzofin ve'ein ashoichet batzofin, that the animal is in the north of the azarah, but the slaughterer does not need to be in the north of the azarah. Ud kokashtach mit Rab Achya nafka. And if we say, wait, but don't we learn that out from Rab Achya? Because Rab Achya had said, now when the pasuk says v'shachat oso yarech hamizbeach tzafona, we're saying that it needs to be in the north, the animals in the north, but not the slaughterer. So don't we already know it out from there? No, we don't. Rab Achya lavlim ute shochip atzafonu da'asa. No. Rab Achya is not coming to teach us that. He's not coming to teach us that the animal is in the north and the slaughterer is not in the north. No, that's not what he's coming to teach us. This is what Rab Achya is saying. Ein ashochet betzofin aval mekabel betzofin. What it's saying is, as we know from the Sa'ir Nasi, that the animal needs to be in the north, but the shochet does not need to be in the north. And what v'shachat oso Aryarchus Bang is saying, and just like we and that halacha of the animal being in the north, but the shochet doesn't need to be in the north, which we know from Sa'ir Nasi, is specifically by shchita, not right to the exclusion of Kabbalah. Right, v'shachat also, that this halacha of the shchita of the animal being in the north, but the shochet not being in the north, is only by shchita to the exclusion of Kabbalah. So it's from the pasuk of v'shachat also yeracham zbeach tzefono that Rab Achia is coming. His chiddush is that it's coming to exclude Kabbalah Saddam. That the Kabbalah Saddam, not only does the animal need to be in the north, but the mikabel also needs to be in the north. Mikabel milokach vilokach nafka, but isn't mikabel learnt out from the extra vav in vilokach lokach vilokach lamash malay? Well, the Tana of our Brisa does not hold of lokach vilokach, and therefore Kabbalah is not being learned out from there. Rather, or I guess Rab Achya does not hold that way of lokach vilokach, and he is coming to exclude Kabbalah Saddam, i.e. to say that the animal and the makabel need to be in the north of the azarah, from v'shachat also, that this exclusion of the shochet from being in the north, right, the fact that there's no requirement of the shochet to be in the north, that is by shchita, but not by Kabbalah. That is where Achia learns it from. Moving on to the next section of today's daf about baking a chometz. No, not a chometz. A chometz minchah. That if a minchah becomes chometz, so we had said in our Mishnah that you'll be chayiv for the kneading of it, you'll be chayiv for the shaping of it, you'll be chayiv for the baking of it. Says the Gemara, v'chayiv al ishosav al arichosav al afioso, omar Rab Pope, says Rab Pope, afoyo lokashtayim. Says Rab Pope that when a person bakes a chometz mincha, he's going to be chayiv twice. Achas al arichoso, v'achas al afioso. Chayiv once for the shaping of it, chayiv a second time for the baking of it. Okay, so by baking, the mincha is going to be chayiv twice, once for the baking and once for the shaping. And as Rashi says, because the baking is the completion of the shaping. What does Rashi say? The afiyah gemar arichahi. The baking is the completion of the shaping, and therefore by baking the mincha, if it's chometz, you're going to be chayiv not just for baking but for the shaping as well. Va'amart ma'afiyah miyuchedes sheimaisa yechidi v'chayav oleh b'fnei atzma. But didn't we say that baking is itself a significant step, and that you'll be chayiv for it alone? So it sounds like you'd be chayiv once, not twice. So there's an interesting answer. Lo kasha. So Rashi gives two ways to explain this. I'll go with the first answer, which is actually the more interesting of them, I think. Hada'arich hu v'afa hu, hada'arich chavre v'yoyev le v'afa. So it depends. If he is shaping it and he is baking it, so then he'll be chayiv once for the baking, meaning he'll be chayiv once for the shaping and chayiv once for the baking. But for the baking, for the fact that he baked the mincha, he's going to be chayiv once for the baking, once for the shaping, once for the baking. But when Rav Papa says that he's chayiv twice for baking, it's not referring to that. If he himself does the shaping and the baking, so he'll be chayiv for the shaping, and for the baking he'll also be chayiv, but for the baking he's chayiv just once, in addition to being chayiv once for the shaping. Now, if his friend did the shaping and then it was given to him to do the baking, well, in that case, since he's doing the baking, he'll be chayiv not just for the baking, but for the shaping as well. So if he does the shaping and the baking, he's chayiv once for shaping, once for baking. But if somebody else did the shaping and he's doing the baking, he's going to be chayiv twice for the baking. Since baking is the completion of the shaping, he's going to be chayiv twice for that. So if he shaped it and he baked it, it'll be chayiv once for the baking, in addition to once for the shaping. But if his friend shaped it and gave it to him and then he baked it, so he's going to be chayiv twice for the baking, to include the shaping as well. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Bechor, she'achazu dam. So, who could tell me about a Korbin Bechor? So, of course, there's a few different types of Bechor. There's Bechor Adam, there's firstborn humans, there's firstborn donkeys, Peter Chomer. There's also firstborn animals. Let's say a firstborn sheep. And as we said earlier, after learning Masechta Menachos, we learn Masechta Chulin and then Masechta Bechoros. We'll learn all about this. So a firstborn sheep, let's say. So essentially it's given to the kohen. Not right away. I think after 30 days it's given to the kohen. Now, a kohen offers it as a Korbin on the Mizbeach, a Korbin Bechor that we learned about in Perek Ezu Mekom. Now there's a halacha by a Bechor. The halacha by a Bechor is that if it gets a mum before it's offered as a Korbin, it could be eaten for lunch. You don't have to be poded, nothing. You could just push it, eat it for lunch. If it gets a mum, you say, it has a mum, you could slaughter it and eat it for lunch. I think you have to bring it. I think the Mishnah in Masechta Bechor says you have to bring it to an expert first. But anyways, gets a mum, you have lunch. Bring it to expert, you have lunch. Drinking a little water here. Now, so if you have this Bechor, so a kohen has a Bechor, and it's very, very ill. It's very, very ill. In order to save it, you have to do bloodletting. You have to do bloodletting. So Bechor she'achazu dam, so a Bechor that is very sick and you have to do bloodletting. Makizin also esadam, so you could bloodlet, but b'makum she'ein osin bo mum. However, the bloodletting needs to be in a place where it's not going to make a mum. Ve'ein makizin esadam b'makum she'osin bo mum. But you can't bloodlet the animal in a place where by putting in the needle or whatever, it's going to make a mum. So, for example, in the ears, the eyes, right? Those are places where you could potentially make a mum, and therefore avoid bloodletting from the ears, bloodletting from the eyes, because that can make a mum. So, sure, go ahead, bloodlet, but avoid making a mum. Divrei Meir, that's the opinion of Rav Meir. The Chacham say no, bloodlet the animal, even from the eye or from the ears, even if it's going to make a mum. However, but don't then slaughter the animal because of that mum. Don't turn around after the bloodletting and saying, oh wow, it has a mum in its eye or a mum in its ear. Okay, well, it's got a mum, lunchtime. No, you could bloodlet even from a place that will make a mum, but then you won't be able to, no slaughtering the animal based on the fact that you created it a mum by bloodletting. Reb Shimon Omer says, Reb Shimon, ap nishchat. Reb Shimon says, actually, not only can you bloodlet the animal in a place where it could make a mum, but even if it does make a mum, you have lunch. It has a mum now. You could slaughter and eat it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afilu meis ein makizin lo es adam. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda has the most extreme opinion. He says, no. Even if it means the animal's going to die, don't bloodlet this animal. Right? No doing bloodletting. I think Rashi says because I think because if we're concerned, right, then you might end up making a mum, right? Well, Ishar is late. Mum. Okay. Anyways, Rabbi Yehuda says don't even get started by this Bechor. Don't do any bloodletting at all, even if it means the Bechor is going to die. So be it. Okay. Hakol modim, that everyone agrees, even though we just had a four-way machlokes, Reb Meir, Chachamim, Reb Shimon, Reb Yehuda, a four-way machlokes when it came to bloodletting, that even though the animal was already about to, is deathly ill, there's no greater mum than that. Even so, you still can't make an additional mum, or at least there's machlokes about it. But nonetheless, hakol modim, everybody, even though it's a four-way machlokes, everyone agrees, but mechametz achar mechametz shehu chayiv, that when it comes to a Korbin minchah, if it's chometz, let's say from the lisha, from the kneading, it became chometz already, and then you shape it, you're going to be chayav twice. So even though when it came to the bechor that already had a mum, he was going to die because it was very ill, there's no greater mum than that, as Rashi says. There's a whole big machlokes. Can you now make another mum to bloodlet it? Okay, there's a whole big machlokes there. But when it comes to a minchah that became chometz during the kneading, and then you shaped it, and then you baked it, you're going to be chayav. You're going to be chayav for each one of those steps. There's no machlokes there. Everyone agrees they're going to be chayav. As the pasuk says, lo se'oseh chometz, it can't be made chometz, v'lo se'ofeh chometz, and you can't bake it when it is chometz. So the separate lavin, as we learned about yesterday, you can be chayiv for each step. So even when it's already chometz, you're still going to be chayiv for the next step that you do when it's chometz. But mesaris achar mesaris, oy vey, this is a little graphic and uncomfortable, but castrating after castrating, shu chayiv, they're going to be chayiv. Tichsiv, as the pasuk says, uma'uch, and crushed testicles, I think, v'chasus, and some other very uncomfortable situation. V'nasuk, v'charus. Nasuk is like, I don't know, you like detach the testicles, but they're still kind of like hanging there in the pouch or something. And then the next one, charus, is you just cut it all off. Yeah. Imal koris uchayev anosek lo kol shechen. Well, why does the pasuk need to say natuk and charus? Natuk, right? Charus is more cut off than natuk is. So why not just say natuk? And if you're chayiv for natuk, which is less of a cutting off, certainly you're going to be chayiv for more of a cutting off. So right, he's talking about like castrating an animal. So imal koris u chayiv anotek lo kol sheken. So ella lahavi notek achar koris shu chayiv. What it's saying is that even if you first notek it, and then right, so it's you like kind of cut off the testicles, but they're still kind of there, and then you like really cut them off, you're going to be chayiv twice. Okay. Lo nechleku ella b'matu mum b'bal mum. The machlekes is only when a mum is mummed in a bal mum. Kilu, you have an animal that's already a mum, bal mum, right? For example, this animal that's going to die, as Rashi says, there's no greater mum than that. And then you make a mum in this. So you have this animal that's already a mum, and now you make a mum. So we talked about a minchah that was already chometz from the lisha, and now you do the, shaping or the baking. We say you're going to be chayiv. Or this animal that was partially castrated, and now you make it fully castrated. In both of those cases, you're chayiv for the second step. But over here, even though it was already a bal mum, it's machlekes if you're going to be chayiv for the next step of making a mum in a bal mum. Reb Meir had said, sure, you can bloodlet, but be sure to avoid the eyes or the ears, a place where it's going to make it a mum. You can't make a mum after it's already a mum. Savar kol mum lo yebo. The pasuk says kol mum. Any mum can't be. It can't be any mum. That comes to include. You can't even mum a animal that's already a bal mum. Even though it's already a bal mum, you still can't mum it. Rabbanan Saver was the rabbis say Tomim yiyeh l'rotzen. The Chacham point out that literally in the pasuk right before it says Kol mum lo yiyebo, it says Tomim yiyeh l'rotzen, i.e., that only when an animal is tomim, only when an animal is in tip-top shape, completely healthy, then you can't make a mum. However, if it's already a bal mum, we're not talking about that. You can make a mum in a bal mum. So therefore the Chacham say, sure, you could bloodlet the animal in a way that it makes a mum, just don't then turn around and say, oh, it's a bal mum, I'm going to eat it for lunch. Reb Meir nami aksiv tamim yiyeh l'ratzon. Reb Meir, doesn't it say tamim yiyeh l'ratzon, that you're only not allowed to make a mum when it's completely healthy? Hahu limute, what that is coming to exclude is bal mum me'ikara. That if it's born with a mum, let's say it's born missing a leg or something, so in that case you could make a mum, no problem, says Rameir. But if it develops a mum, you can't make a mum. Bal mum me'ikara dikla ba'almu. One second, bal mum me'ikara is basically just like a tree. I mean, it's a bal mum me'ikara. Of course, there's not going to be any issue with making a mum if it was born with a mum. So ela limute psule amukdashim lacher pijonim. Okay, rather, Reb Meir is saying is that if you have an animal, and an animal gets a mum. No, yes. You have an animal, right? You have an animal, it's going to be a Korbin. The animal now gets a mum, so it can't be offered as a Korbin. So you sell it. So the person who buys it, he's allowed to, right? So meaning what you do is you sell it, and then that money you use to buy a new animal. But the person who buys it is allowed to eat it, but he's not allowed to work it, and he's not allowed to shear its wool. He's only allowed to eat it. Right? When you have a Korbin that gets a mum and you sell it, the buyer, he's allowed to eat it. He can't work it. He can't get its wool. So I may have thought that the buyer, just like he can't work it, he can't get its wool, he also can't make it a bal mum. Right? He can't make it another mum. No, so in that case he can't. That psule amukdashim lacher pijonim, he can make a mum there. However, before it's sold, which is what we're talking about, you have this bechor that is sick and it's considered like it as a mum, you can't make another mum on it. So I may have thought when selling the bal mum, hoil ve'asir begiza ve'avoda, since you're not allowed to shear it, you're not allowed to work it, b'mumam nami litzrei, maybe I also can't mum it, kamash malon. So Rameir is saying that in that case you can mum it. However, Rameir would say that an animal that hasn't been sold and has a mum, you can't mum that. What do the rabbis do with kol mum lo yebo? What's it coming to include? It's needed the Tanya that we learn about it. Kol mum lo yebo ainli ela shelo yehe bo mum. Okay, all I know is don't make a mum in an animal, right? They would say it's talking about a healthy animal, right? A healthy animal, don't mum it. How do we know don't even cause for a mum? Don't leave dough or figs or something on its ear. So that a dog will come and try to eat it and then make a mum. Meaning, the Chacham say, not only are you not allowed to make a mum directly in an animal, but you also can't cause a mum. How so? Well, as we were saying earlier, that a mum could be some kind of, the ear gets bit off. That would be a mum. So don't kind of put some dog food on top of the ear so that a dog is going to go and to eat the food and chomp off the ear and say, oh, okay, it's missing an ear, it's got a mum. Don't even cause for a mum. Right? Again, how do we know that you shouldn't even cause a mum? Don't leave dough or dvela or figs al gabia ozan on the ear of the animal, and then the dog will come bi'etlenu and take it and in the meantime chomp off the ear. Any mum, to include even a scenario like that where it's kind of a mum is caused rather than mummed directly. Friends, that was Daf Nunvav, Daf 56 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, on Daf 56, we talked about slaughtering a chatas in the north of the Azarah. We had that pasuk by the Sa'ir Nasi, which talks about slaughtering the Sa'ir Nasi in the north of the Azarah. And we're trying to figure out, it says, slaughter it. What's it including? We thought maybe it's talking about Sa'ir Nachshin, and because maybe I would think that because it's included in Smicha, it has to be slaughtered in the north, but we ended up throwing out the whole thing. In the end, what we said is that it says that by the Sa'ir Nasi, by the Korbin chatas of a king, it needs to be slaughtered in the north, i.e. the animal needs to be in the north, but the slaughterer does not need to be in the north. And that, I think, is not limited to just Sa'ir Nasi, but I think extended to other chatos as well, that the animal needs to be in the north, but the slaughterer does not need to be in the north. And then we discussed baking a chometz minchah that you'd be chayiv for each step, We saw an interesting sheet of a papa that you be chayiv twice for the baking, one for the shaping and once for the baking. We discussed in what scenario that would be. And then we got into the concept of mechametz achar mechametz, right? That even though it's already chometz from, let's say, the kneading, you're also going to be chayiv for the shaping. You're also going to be chayiv for the baking. And we discussed this in different scenarios. We discussed it by castration. We discussed it by an animal that gets a mum. Can you make a mum after the fact? So it's a big machlokas there based on psukim. Friends, that was Daf Nunvav, Daf 56 of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great, great, great day. Cheers.